I thought my promotion party would change my life, but my pregnant sister steal my spotlight, so her affair. I'm not someone who ever got things handed to her. Honestly, nothing in my life has ever come easy, not grades, not friends, not the job I wanted so badly after college. For as long as I can remember, my sister Brooke seemed to have a magnet in her pocket for luck and approval, especially from our parents. Brooke was 2 years older than me, and everything she touched seemed to turn into a family event. Her piano recitals, her engagement, the day she got accepted to college on a full ride for track. My parents, June and Frank, have lived in the same old house in Evanston since before I was born, and they never really changed. Dad worked for the city. Mom was a nurse at the hospital a few blocks away. They did their best, I guess, but there was never any hiding that Brooke was their favorite. Growing up, I learned that getting attention meant working twice as hard. When I graduated from high school, there was a sheet cake and a dinner at Applebee's, and the next week Brooke got a weekend at the lake for her birthday with all her friends. But it's fine, I told myself, because I'd proved myself in other ways. I left for college in Chicago, taking out loans, working 2 jobs, and promising myself that one day, someone would finally see me. After I graduated, I managed to get an internship at this agency downtown called Weiler Creative. No one knew who I was, but I showed up early, stayed late, and offered to do every annoying task, no matter how boring or thankless. When my boss dumped her client presentations on my desk at 5:15 on a Friday, I said yes with a smile and figured out how to get them done. When someone needed to run out for bagels or coffee, I volunteered. For the first year, I barely existed outside of work. All I did was grind, just hoping to make enough of an impression that one day I'd be more than invisible. For years passed. I got promoted, finally, first to junior analyst, then strategist, and every time I took on extra projects nobody else wanted. There was a whole layer of politics at Weiler that I didn't really understand at first. Some people coasted, some made alliances over martinis, and some, like me, were basically invisible until something went wrong. There was this one guy, Eric, who seemed to get credit for every campaign, even when he spent half his day sending memes and making jokes in meetings. My manager, Julia, loved him, and when he volunteered for extra work, he usually handed it off to someone like me anyway. Still, I kept my head down and did the work, thinking maybe someday it would pay off. Then, suddenly it did. I remember that day with absolute clarity. It was a freezing Monday in early February, snow swirling sideways, and my shoes were soaked by the time I reached the office. Julia called me into her office and looked at me in that way that made me think I was in trouble. She told me, "Morgan, we're moving you up to senior strategist." I sat there in disbelief as she listed my new responsibilities and explained that I'd be getting my own office. The best part? A salary bump that meant I might finally be able to pay off my loans before I turned 40. I tried to keep it together in her office, gripping the arms of my chair so I wouldn't make a fool of myself. The truth is, I'd never felt prouder in my whole life. I called my best friend Natalie on the way home, babbling about every little detail. She's one of those friends who actually listens and remembers everything. The one who sends you texts before a big meeting just to remind you you're not alone. We celebrated over cheap margaritas that night, and I knew right away that I wanted to throw a party. Not just a casual night out or dinner with my parents, but a real, memorable celebration. I booked 3 tables at a place called Le Papillon, a new French spot downtown where every meal felt like an event. The menu was outrageously expensive, but I didn't care. For once, I was going to treat myself and the people who mattered to me. I spent the next week picking out invitations, real ones, with gold-embossed letters that announced Morgan's promotion, a night to celebrate. I ordered a dress that cost more than 3 months of groceries. I scheduled a hair appointment at a salon so fancy, I worried about tipping wrong. I invited everyone who'd seen me at my lowest, my friends from work and college, my grandmother Ruby, my aunts, my cousins Jamie and Miles, and of course, my parents and Brooke, along with her husband Sean. There were about 20 people on the guest list, but it felt like the guest list for a small wedding, not just a dinner. For the first time, I felt excited to be the center of attention. I wanted my parents to see what I'd achieved without anyone making excuses for why it wasn't a big deal. I kept telling myself that this was finally my moment. I wouldn't let anything or anyone take it away, not even Brooke, whose life had always been just a little brighter in everyone's eyes. By the time I'd triple-checked the RSVP list, booked a car to the restaurant, and picked out the perfect earrings, I honestly believed this was the start of something new. I wanted to believe, just this once, that I'd be the one people talked about at family gatherings, not the afterthought at the edge of someone else's celebration. 3 days before the party, my life did that thing where everything flips upside down at exactly the worst possible moment. It was a cold Thursday afternoon, the kind that makes you want to crawl into bed and hide from the world, and I was in my tiny apartment going over party details for the 100th time. I was halfway through rechecking the restaurant confirmation when my phone rang. I saw Natalie's name pop up, and since she never calls me during the workday unless it's important, my stomach tensed before I even answered. She didn't waste any time, just blurted out, "Morgan, you need to sit down. This is going to sound insane." Natalie explained that she'd been at a coffee shop in Oak Park that morning, the one with the blue tiles and the big windows that everyone posts on Instagram. She'd gone there to meet a client, but on her way out, she saw my sister Brooke in the far corner, sitting across from a guy who definitely wasn't Sean. She described the man as tall, with dark hair and an old university hoodie, and that was all it took for me to realize exactly who she meant. Logan. I hadn't seen Logan in years, but I knew his look anywhere. Before Sean, Brooke had dated Logan forever, until one of those messy, screaming breakups that had my parents pretending not to hear the arguments through the walls. Natalie said she didn't want to assume the worst, but then she saw Brooke and Logan lean in across the table and kiss. Not a quick hug or peck, but the kind of long, slow kiss you give someone you're seeing behind closed doors. My first thought was that Natalie must be mistaken, but she was adamant, even apologizing for telling me something she knew I wouldn't want to hear. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was. My sister, married for just over a year, meeting her old flame in broad daylight. Natalie told me she'd even taken a short video, not out of malice, but because she knew nobody would believe it without proof. I told her to send it, even though I already felt sick to my stomach. I watched the video a dozen times, my mind cycling through disbelief, anger, and then a weird sort of numbness. Brooke's hair was different now. She'd dyed it a lighter shade since getting married, but her laugh was the same. Logan looked just as cocky as ever, smirking as he leaned over the table. I stared at that video on my phone for what felt like an hour, feeling my pulse in my ears and my chest tight, with some mix of rage and exhaustion. There were so many things I wanted to do. I wanted to call Brooke and demand an explanation. I wanted to send the video to Sean. I even wanted to call my parents and let them know their perfect daughter was about to blow up her life in spectacular fashion. But I didn't do any of those things, at least not yet. All I could think was, why now? Why? Out of all the weeks in the year, did she have to start drama right before my one chance to have the spotlight? For once, I just wanted to celebrate something without chaos swirling around my family. Eventually, I decided to do nothing at all. I was done cleaning up after Brooke. Done being the one who tried to smooth things over. Done being the person everyone expected to take the high road. This mess belonged to her, and I was going to let her sit in it, at least until my party was over. The next morning, just as I was settling in at my desk and trying to focus on work, my phone rang again. This time it was my mom, June, and the second I heard her voice, I knew something was brewing. She didn't ask how I was or if I was busy. She just told me in her most serious tone, "Morgan, your father and I want you to come by the house tonight. We need to have a family talk." I asked if something was wrong, but she just repeated, "Come at 7. Your sister will be here, too." She hung up before I could even protest. The rest of the day, I felt like there was a pit in my stomach. The video burned a hole in my pocket. Every time I opened my phone, I saw Brooke and Logan, their heads close together, smiling like there was no one else in the world. Part of me wondered if Brooke would come clean, if maybe this family talk was going to be her big confession. Another part of me hoped it was about something else, maybe something so normal that I'd laugh about it later. At exactly 7, I parked in front of the house where I grew up, the windows warm and bright against the winter night. My dad, Frank, was in his usual recliner, reading the paper with the television on mute. My mom greeted me with a tight smile and led me into the living room, where Brooke was already sitting on the couch, wringing her hands and looking pale. Her husband Sean was noticeably absent. I sat down on the far end of the couch, putting space between us, and waited for someone to say something. Brooke kept glancing at my mom and dad, her face twitching like she was holding back tears. Finally, she blurted out, "I'm pregnant." For a second, I was so shocked that I forgot about everything else. Pregnant. My sister was going to have a baby. My mom's face broke into the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years, and my dad looked genuinely moved. They both hugged her, congratulated her, asked her a million questions about doctors and dates, and whether she'd told Sean yet. After the congratulations died down, My mom turned to me with that gentle but firm tone she uses when she's already made up her mind. Morgan, your sister's news is such a blessing. And since you're already having your celebration at Le Papillon, your father and I thought it would be wonderful to combine the two events. She didn't even phrase it as a question. It would mean so much to us if you could share your party with Brooke and make it a family celebration. I stared at them, feeling my throat tighten. I looked at Brooke, who was already crying, her mascara smudging as she whispered, "It would really help me, Morgan. It would save us money, and I want to be surrounded by family when we tell everyone." My dad chimed in, insisting that this was a special opportunity for both of us, and what a great story it would make for years to come. The air in the room felt like it was closing in. I'd spent weeks planning this party, saving up, choosing every little detail, and suddenly it was going to be hijacked by yet another milestone in Brooke's life. I heard myself saying, quietly at first but with more confidence as I spoke, "I'm sorry, but I can't do that. This is my party, and I've worked really hard for it. I want to celebrate my promotion, not just be an afterthought at someone else's big announcement." My mom's face hardened immediately. She accused me of being selfish, of not understanding what family was all about. My dad's voice grew stern, warning me not to ruin this for everyone. Brooke's tears turned into full-on sobbing, and she started pleading, telling me she needed my support and couldn't handle the stress of planning her own announcement party. I wanted to scream that none of this was my fault, that for once I deserved to have something just for me. But instead I stood up, grabbed my coat, and told them I'd see them at the party, if they could manage to celebrate me for a single evening. I drove home shaking, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I replayed the entire conversation in my head a dozen times. No matter how I twisted it, I always ended up furious. For as long as I could remember, every family event had been twisted to highlight Brooke. My high school graduation party was canceled because Brooke sprained her ankle at a track meet. The day I got my first real job offer, Brooke announced her engagement, and suddenly my news was old and irrelevant. I told myself I'd be strong this time. If my family wanted to show up, fine, but they would be there for me, not for another episode of The Brooke Show. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something had shifted inside me. Maybe it was the promotion, maybe it was just getting older, but for once I wasn't willing to fold just to keep the peace. I deserved this celebration. I deserved to be seen. And if my family couldn't manage that, then maybe I needed to stop letting them take up so much space in my life. The night of my party finally arrived, and for the first time in forever, I actually felt like I belonged somewhere that wasn't the sidelines. I woke up early and spent way too long trying to decide how I wanted my hair, then went to the salon anyway, trusting someone else to make me look better than I ever could on my own. The city felt electric that afternoon. Spring was creeping in, the lake wind was cold but not sharp, and every part of me buzzed with nerves and hope. My dress hung perfectly, shimmering black fabric that looked almost silver in certain light. I remember looking at myself in the mirror before I left and thinking, this is who I've always wanted to be, even if nobody ever noticed before. I arrived at Le Papillon a little early to check the tables, and the restaurant staff had really gone above and beyond. Crisp, white linens, flickering candles, menus printed with my name in gold, and little vases of white lilies. Every detail was exactly what I'd imagined, down to the music playing quietly in the background. My friends started to arrive, one by one. Natalie, with her infectious laugh, Denise and Eric from work, my cousin Jamie who brought her new boyfriend, and a few others from college who'd stayed close over the years. The air was warm with laughter, hugs, and genuine congratulations. People toasted me before dinner even started, and for once, I could feel myself relaxing, just letting the happiness sink in without waiting for someone else to take it away. But as the clock crept closer to 7:30, I realized my parents and Brooke still hadn't shown up. I tried not to care, tried to keep my attention on the people who were actually present, but I could feel that old anxiety creeping up my spine. Finally, a good 20 minutes late, my mom, dad, Brooke, and Sean walked in together. They all looked tense and awkward, and even though my mom tried to paste on a smile, I could see the edge behind it. Brooke wore a powder blue dress and clung to Sean's arm like she was afraid of losing him in a crowd. My dad mumbled a quick hello, and Brooke gave me the kind of hug you give someone when you're trying to make up for something but don't want to actually talk about it. We sat down at the main table, which I'd set aside for family and my closest friends. The server brought out glasses of sparkling wine, and the first course, a bright, lemony salad that was almost too pretty to eat. For a few moments, everything felt normal. My grandmother Ruby complimented my dress, My aunts swapped stories about their jobs, and my friends kept the mood light with jokes about work and dating in the city. But beneath the surface, I could sense the tension in the air, like everyone was waiting for a storm to break. After the salad plates were cleared, I took out the note card I'd written my speech on. My hands shook a little, but I stood up anyway, determined not to let nerves or old patterns get the better of me. I cleared my throat, raised my glass, and began to thank everyone for coming. I talked about how much this promotion meant to me, about the years of late nights and hard work, and how I couldn't have done it without the support of the people in that room. I'd barely gotten through my second sentence when Brooke stood up suddenly, cutting me off mid-word. She didn't even bother to apologize. She just said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Before Morgan says anything else, I want to share some news. Sean and I are having a baby." Her announcement was met with a tidal wave of applause and squeals from the relatives, as if she'd just declared peace in the Middle East. My aunts rushed over to hug her. My mom cried. My dad beamed with pride. And even people who barely knew her started toasting Brooke and Sean. My note card felt heavy in my hand. I just stood there, frozen, watching my own party get hijacked right before my eyes. As I sat down, Brooke turned to me with a sweet, almost mocking smile and said, "Since this is your party, Morgan, I hope you don't mind sharing the spotlight. I mean, a baby is a bigger deal than a job, right?" I could hear my mom agreeing in the background, telling anyone who would listen that a grandchild was the best news the family could hope for. My dad clapped me on the back, but didn't say much, as if he wasn't sure if it was still appropriate to congratulate me at my own celebration. For a few agonizing minutes, I tried to hold it together. I tried to laugh along, tried to answer questions from distant relatives about Brooke's due date, but I felt invisible all over again. My friends, though, looked at me in outrage. Natalie's jaw was set. Denise kept glancing at me for permission to say something, and Eric from work whispered under his breath, "This is messed up." My grandmother Ruby reached over, squeezed my hand, and just nodded, her eyes saying more than words ever could. Brooke, basking in the attention, didn't notice how uncomfortable I was. She kept gushing about baby names and morning sickness, practically holding court while my parents fed her questions. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady. I told Brooke, my parents, and the rest of the family that I was glad for the good news, but tonight was meant to celebrate my promotion, not someone else's milestone. My mom's face twisted in disappointment, and my dad shook his head like I was some kind of problem child. Brooke immediately started crying, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear, insisting that I was selfish for not letting her have her moment. That's when something inside me snapped. Maybe it was all the years of being second best, all the times my achievements were overshadowed, or maybe I was just tired of watching my sister rewrite the narrative. Before I could talk myself out of it, I pulled out my phone, turned the screen toward the table, and said, "You want the spotlight, Brooke? Fine. Here's something for you." I pressed play on Natalie's video. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Brooke and Logan in the cafe, their heads close together, sharing a kiss that left nothing to the imagination. For a few seconds, there was silence, shocking, heavy silence. My mom's face drained of color, my dad looked stunned, and Sean went completely rigid, staring at Brooke like she was a stranger. When the video ended, Brooke started yelling that it was fake, that someone must have doctored it, but Natalie stood up and confirmed, loudly, that she'd filmed it herself just days ago. Sean pushed back from the table and walked out, barely saying a word. Brooke chased after him, sobbing and begging for him to listen. My parents turned on me, furious and blaming me for ruining the night, for being vindictive and cruel, for destroying the family. They left in a huff, trailing after Brooke, leaving the rest of us in an awkward, echoing silence. For about 10 seconds, no one said anything. Then my grandmother Ruby raised her glass and said, "Well, I guess we all needed a little drama tonight." The table erupted into nervous laughter, and just like that, the tension snapped. My friends, cousins, and the few family members left toasted my promotion, toasted to surviving family. And for the first time in years, I let myself be the center of attention. The rest of the night was messy and loud and absolutely perfect. The days after my party were a kind of strange, jittery blur, almost like I'd stepped out of my real life and into some movie where every scene teetered between comedy and disaster. The group texts blew up, with half my relatives whispering about what had happened at Le Papillon and the other half pretending it never happened at all. My parents and Brooke refused to speak to me, not that I expected them to. My mom's last words in the restaurant rang in my ears for days. accusing me of destroying the family and humiliating Brooke on purpose. My dad sent one terse message telling me I needed to fix this, whatever that meant. I stared at my phone, reread his words, and put the whole family group chat on mute for the first time in my life. Most of my friends and aunts checked in to say they were on my side. Natalie sent me flowers with a note that simply read, "About damn time." Denise took me out for burgers and milkshakes, refusing to even mention Brooke's name, as if erasing her from the conversation would erase the sting. My grandmother Ruby became my rock, calling every other day to make sure I was eating and reminding me that sometimes family isn't about who shares your blood, but who actually shows up when things get hard. My cousin Jamie invited me to her apartment for a movie night, and even Eric from work dropped off a bottle of wine with a sticky note that said, "You're the only reason I stay at Weiler." Brooke, meanwhile, disappeared off social media entirely. The family gossip mill worked overtime piecing together her fallout. A week after the party, Jamie called me late at night to say that Sean had moved out of their place in the suburbs, changing all the locks and cutting off Brooke's credit cards. He'd apparently seen enough in that short video to know the truth. And the truth was, Brooke had been seeing Logan for months, behind everyone's back. Rumors spread that Sean had asked for a paternity test, which only confirmed what everyone already suspected: the baby wasn't his. Within a month, Brooke's perfect marriage was officially over, with lawyers trading angry emails and her moving back into my parents' cramped little house in Evanston. I heard most of this not from my parents, but from Ruby and Jamie, since June and Frank wanted nothing to do with me. Every time Ruby relayed a new detail, I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. For years, I had believed that if I just worked harder or kept my head down, I could somehow earn a spot in my own family. But now, with the mask off and the truth out, I realized I didn't even want to try anymore. I had my friends, my work, and the few relatives who chose to stay in my corner when things got ugly. I threw myself into my job at Weiler, taking on projects that used to scare me and finally letting myself believe I was good enough. The promotion was even harder than I expected. More late nights, more pressure, and more moments when I doubted myself. But I started to find my rhythm. My boss, Julia, finally began to see me as a real leader, not just the quiet one in the back of the room. I stopped worrying about what my parents would think every time I made a decision. Instead, I let myself be proud. I worked with clients I never thought I'd meet, led brainstorm sessions that ended with my ideas on the whiteboard, and once even got called out in a company-wide email for outstanding results on the Stewart account. On weekends, I saw Ruby or spent time with Jamie, who confided in me about her own struggles with our family's drama. Sometimes we'd just sit on her couch, eating takeout and watching bad reality TV, and I'd realize how much lighter I felt without the constant need for approval from people who never seemed to give it. My friends and I started a little tradition. Every Friday, we'd pick a different restaurant in the city and spend the night talking about everything except work or family. I was building something I hadn't known I needed, a new kind of family, one made of people who liked me for exactly who I was. As for Brooke, the news never got better. Logan turned out to be even more unreliable than everyone remembered. He'd let Brooke stay over sometimes, but he kept his own apartment and showed no interest in anything permanent. Jamie told me that my parents kept pushing Brooke to work things out, as if any of this could be solved with a nice dinner or a forced apology. Brooke's friends stopped answering her calls, and she slipped further into the background of family events, too ashamed to show her face at church or at Ruby's Sunday dinners. My parents didn't try to reach out again for months, except for one angry email demanding that I apologize to Brooke for embarrassing her. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. I was done being the family scapegoat, the one who was supposed to put my own happiness aside so my sister could keep her crown. The strangest part was, I didn't feel lonely. I missed the idea of family, but the reality had never lived up to it anyway. Work kept me busier than ever. I took on a mentorship program at Weiler, helping new hires avoid the same mistakes I'd made when I was fresh out of college. My confidence grew, not because people finally recognized me, but because I started recognizing myself. My therapist. Yes, I finally started seeing one. And it was the best decision I'd made all year. Helped me understand that sometimes you have to mourn what you wish you'd had, so you can appreciate what you actually do have. The real turning point came at a company retreat in Wisconsin, where I stood in front of the entire staff and presented a new campaign. People actually listened. They cared what I thought. I realized in that moment that the respect I'd been chasing for my family was already mine in every other part of my life. 6 months after my party, I got promoted again, this time to associate director. I didn't throw a big party or send out invitations. Instead, I celebrated quietly with Ruby, Jamie, and a few close friends over pizza and ice cream. We laughed about the chaos that had started it all, and Ruby raised her glass, saying, "To Morgan, who finally learned you don't have to be last to be loved." For the first time, I believed her. The months kept rolling by, and I found peace in places I never expected. My Sundays were filled with long walks by the lake, coffee dates with friends, and the kind of quiet, ordinary happiness that comes when you finally stop begging for scraps of love. The old wounds hurt less. I let myself imagine a future where my family might never come around, and that was okay. I had survived the storm and built something stronger in its place. That was all the closure I needed. I always thought the aftermath would be the quiet part, that after the blowout with my family and Brooke's messy unraveling, life would finally settle down and the drama would end for good. For a while, that was actually true. The rest of that year rolled by in a blur of work, dinners with friends, Friday night movies with Jamie, and weekly phone calls with Ruby, who always asked if I was eating enough and if I'd met anyone interesting yet. My world was small but finally peaceful, and I started to believe that maybe I could have this forever, a life defined by choice and quiet, not chaos and old wounds. Then, one chilly November morning, just as the city was starting to freeze over and every tree on my block seemed to lose its last stubborn leaf, I got a letter in my mailbox that sent a shiver down my spine. The envelope was unmarked, no return address, just my name written in a handwriting I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. Inside was a single page, folded so tightly it felt like a secret, and when I opened it, I saw a black and white printout of a DNA test. My breath caught as I realized what it was. Brooke's baby wasn't Sean's, but it wasn't Logan's either. There was another name, one I'd never seen before. Evan, someone who, as far as I could tell, had never been part of our tangled web. My hands shook as I read the line that said, "Probability of paternity, 99.9%. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All this time, all this heartbreak, and the truth was even messier than any of us had guessed. It made me wonder if Brooke had been living in her own private storm for years, juggling lies so heavy they finally crushed her. I didn't tell anyone about the letter, not even Ruby or Jamie. For the first time, I felt a strange kind of pity for my sister, even though I still couldn't forgive her for everything she'd taken from me. Sometimes the truth is so heavy it breaks everyone, not just the guilty. The letter should have made me feel powerful, or at least vindicated, but it didn't. Instead, it made me realize how far I'd come. I wasn't interested in revenge or family secrets anymore. I'd found my own happiness, and I didn't need the old family story to define me. That winter, as the city went dark early and the snow started piling up outside my apartment, I focused on what mattered. I worked hard, laughed harder, and let myself love the people who had chosen me over and over again. I let go of my old self, the girl who needed to be chosen by people who would never choose her. My parents didn't reach out. Brooke didn't either. Sometimes I'd see her name pop up in a group chat I'd muted months before, or I'd hear from Jamie that my parents were still blaming me for the collapse of the family, even as their lives kept spiraling. Sean moved on quickly, posting photos from hiking trips and dog parks with his new girlfriend. Ruby and I kept up our Sunday lunches, her laughter filling my kitchen, her wisdom anchoring me when I worried I'd made some mistake I couldn't fix. I didn't bother explaining to her about the letter or the baby or Evan. She'd made it clear that she'd picked her side a long time ago, and she never once made me feel guilty for standing up for myself. I started going to therapy more regularly, and for the first time, I said out loud that I was proud of what I'd done. It's a strange feeling to realize that sometimes burning a bridge is what saves you from drowning. I met new people at work, mentored new hires, and even dated a little. I didn't tell any of them the full story. That part of my life felt like it belonged to someone else, a girl who no longer needed to apologize for existing. When my birthday rolled around in the spring, Jamie and Ruby insisted on throwing me a dinner at my favorite Italian place in the city. There were only 8 of us, but it felt bigger and warmer than any party I'd ever had. Natalie came in from out of town, bringing a silly birthday hat and a cake with my name spelled wrong, and Eric from work toasted me with cheap Prosecco, declaring, "To Morgan, the last honest person in Chicago." The whole night, I felt lighter than I ever had, as if every part of my life finally fit together in a way I could believe. Then, right as dessert was being served, Jamie's phone buzzed and her face went pale. She handed me the phone without saying a word. There was a message from my mother. "Morgan, we need you. Brooke's gone. Please help us." For a moment, The world shrank back to that old, suffocating place, as if the past year had never happened. I sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, staring at the message. Gone. Did that mean she'd run away? Was she in trouble? For one wild second, I pictured Brooke just leaving, slipping out of the story, vanishing to start a new life where nobody knew what she'd done. The whole table went silent, everyone watching me for a reaction. Natalie squeezed my hand under the table, her eyes asking a question I didn't want to answer. Part of me wanted to get up, call my mother, and jump straight back into the old pattern, saving Brooke, smoothing things over, trying to be the glue that kept a broken family together. Another part of me, the part that had learned to protect my own happiness, whispered that I didn't owe anyone my pain anymore. I looked around at the faces that had become my family, the people who'd stayed, who'd listened, who'd chosen me again and again. In that moment, I made a choice I never thought I'd make. I turned off Jamie's phone, set it face down on the table, and looked up with a calm I'd never felt before. I told everyone that tonight was for celebrating, that I would deal with the message tomorrow. If Brooke needed help, she'd have to ask me herself. I wasn't going to lose myself to save someone who never wanted to be saved. We finished dessert, laughed a little too loudly, and when I walked out into the city night, I finally felt free. For once, the ending was mine to write.